All right, we'll begin. Welcome, Compact Signers, to our 2026 Q1 briefing session. I'm Kim Borman, Executive Director of the Boston Women's Workforce Council, and will be today's moderator. Our program today is entitled Advancing Women in a Shifting Landscape, a conversation with Dr. Misty Heggeness, author of Swiftynomics. Dr. Hegeness is an associate professor of economics and public affairs at the University of Kansas. Prior to that, she was a principal economist and senior advisor at the US Census Bureau. Her work is cited regularly in media outlets, including the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Economist, Science, and the Washington Post, where we became acquainted with her research showing a drop in women in the workforce as employers started demanding employees return to the office. The decrease was most profound among women with young children. Dr. Hegeness's new book, Swiftynomics, How Women Mastermind and Redefine Our Economy, uses Taylor Swift as a model for how to take charge of your career and reinvent yourself when necessary to meet new challenges. She will speak today about how employers, hoping to retain talent, can help with this reinvention with minimal disruption and great returns. We'll start today with remarks by Dr. Hegeness. We'll then dive into how Misty's ideas work in the context of today's political challenges. Finally, we'll try to answer any questions that you may have on the topic that haven't been addressed. Please feel free to put your questions in Q&A function. We'll get to as many possible in our hour together. I will now hand it over to our esteemed guest, Dr. Misty Heggeness.
Excellent. Thank you, Kim. I'm so excited to be here with all of you. I will make a little caveat that I have a rambunctious little puppy over here who might start barking, so we'll just ignore him if he does. So I'm really excited to be here today. I wanted to come and talk with all of you about women in the workforce and ways in which leaders and businesses can really tap into, unharnessed potential of women in our businesses today. And I think what I'm going to do is start by just talking about some things that I've observed since the pandemic in terms of women's work. The pandemic was a really rough time for a lot of women, especially for caregivers. And, I had a 10 and a 12-year-old at the time that the pandemic hit, and I was working at the Census Bureau. And one thing that became really apparent during the pandemic was that there are alternative ways that we can create flexible situations for women who work and for caregivers who work that allow women to participate fully in the labor force while also taking care of and handling care demands in the household. And so I want to walk through a little bit kind of what happened at the onset of the pandemic, what we've seen since then, what's going on in the private sector and workforce now, and then ways that I think or strategies I think employers can use to strengthen their employee engagement and commitment to your companies. So I was one of the first researchers to come out with a paper on the impact of the pandemic on mothers' labor force participation, essentially showing that there wasn't really any differential effect on mothers leaving the labor force when the pandemic hit in March 2020, but there was a differential effect in leave take-up. And so mothers disproportionately took more paid and unpaid leave than any other, than fathers, than women without children. And during the pandemic, a lot of women had to balance caregiving needs with working from home, or women in lower earning jobs would take their children with them. So you would see women who were engaged in a job that was grocery delivery, and they would have their children in the back seat of their car while they were doing that. I think the traditional way that we think about women in the workforce is that we think about women's caregiving needs as potentially a burden on employers, potentially a burden on understanding the commitment that women have to work and to their jobs. One of my goals with my book that just came out in January, Swiftynomics, is to really flip that script and to help leaders in organizations and employers view that characteristic of that disproportionately is attached to women as a strength instead of a weakness. And if we view it as a strength instead of a weakness in terms of our employees, that has a couple of implications. One, it means that we need to really figure out how we continue to tap into the talent and productivity that mothers and caregivers can provide to our businesses and organizations. We need to get creative about really setting up environments within our organizations that are diverse in nature to the needs of workers. One example is, you might have a lot of Gen Zs working in your organization, and a lot of Gen Zs, haven't coupled up yet, haven't had children yet, and they live alone. And their most ideal work scenario or work setting is going to be in the office, where they can socialize and interact in 3D with other colleagues. But you have other demographic groups who can be just as productive, more or less as productive as the younger generation, but the requirements that they have in a work setting is different. So for myself, for example, I'm a Gen X. I, have two kids. I'm hyper productive, but the way that I'm productive for my employer is very much intertwined with my ability to caregive my now teenage children. They're now 15 and 17. But for example, before they got their driver's license, I was having to drive them to and from school every day because I live in a community that has a very dysfunctional busing system. And so buses weren't an option for my kids. And what that meant was that I would have to, between 2 and 3 every day, not work. Basically, I told my staff, do not schedule anything for me between 2 and 3. Don't try to call me because I, won't answer. Or if you have to schedule a meeting that I have to be at between 2 and 3, I'm going to be doing it from my car without the video on because I will be, transferring my kids to and from. That meant for me that I just had to work an extra hour after dinner to make up that time that I had to go and pick up my kids. But it was to my employer's advantage to let me structure my work schedule in that way because they, were able to really tap in the best light and the best way to my talent and my skill set. And so, it ended up being a win-win for everybody. But again, these ideas of, we need extreme flexibility for everybody. We need work from home for everybody. We need in the office for everybody. Those are really simple solutions that usually only benefit a subset of the demographic of your workforce. And so, we'll talk more about this in the Q&A, but Kim and I will have a discussion more thoroughly about this. But I think the next generation of being employers who thrive, who maximize the productivity of their employees, and who really survive into the next decade or the next era are going to be employers who understand that employees are not all the same and they have different needs at different points in their lifetime. And when you're not flexible as an employer to those different needs, you end up losing out on talent. So it is much more efficient and effective for employers to figure out how to tap into women's talent at the point when they start having children in order to maintain them as employees and maintain the skill set that you've already trained them in, than it is to lose them as an employee because you can't figure out a way to have a flexible work schedule for them. And then you have to hire somebody else and entirely retrain them. The other thing that I'll mention And then Kim, you're just going to cut me off when my time is up here. But the other thing that I'll mention is there are studies in economics showing that productivity peaks are different by gender. So there's this really good study looking at patent production and patent productivity in among academics, and it basically shows that men's productivity and patent production peaks at like there. If I was in the room with you guys 3D, I would say, what do you think the peak age is for men? But I'll just tell you since we're on Zoom. Patent productivity for men happens in their late 20s, and that is not the same for women. So women's patent productivity happens in the early 40s. And so, we're slowly accumulating this scientific evidence that the ways that women move around in the world today just looks differently than men, but we still have this model that is pegged to the male experience. The one thing that I say is the world outside of our homes was built for the ease of men and people with care privilege, where care privilege is just, you're an able-bodied adult and you have somebody else taking care of your needs. So my goal here is just to help us reframe the way that we think about our employees, the structures that we put in place, and allowing for flexibility and diversity depending on the age, gender, race, ethnicity, experience, disabilities of our employees, and being flexible enough. Yep, I got that, Hannah. Being flexible enough to really just lean into that. And I think that the employers that do lean into that framework and mindset are going to be the ones who are really going to benefit the most from their employees.
All right. Oh, thank you, Misty, for your insights. Let's start with a few questions that we have, and then we'll take some from the audience too. But so you've argued that investing in and retaining employees needs to look different for each person. How do HR leaders start that? I mean, it sounds a little impractical to have different kinds of work plans for different kinds of employees. So how would you suggest that HR leaders do this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there is a certain level of skill set and training that needs to take place at the managerial level in terms of understanding our employees. One of the biggest frustrations for me after the pandemic was you had a whole bunch of male with lots of care privilege CEOs who just went total backlash from the work from home and just like forced everybody back into the office. And the way that I view that is that really to me it looks like lazy management. It looks like we're not sure what's going on with our employees when they're in their home, but we don't want to do the work to interact and engage with them to figure out how we measure their productivity and how we align their work with what we're doing and making sure that it's done in the best light. So instead, we're just going to bring everybody into the office, but bringing everybody into the office does not guarantee that people are going to be productive just because there's a button seat. And so I think this does require a lot more effort, a lot more work on the part of the managers within your company. I think from an HR perspective, it's not necessarily about HR folks finding the solutions. It's about being open to listen to your employees' needs. And so if I'm an employee who is a stellar employee, and I, am generating, lots of sales and revenue for the company. And I know that there's going to be a time over the next 6 months where I need to take care of an elder parent, and that's going to require me to kind of physically be in a similar space to them. You want, as an HR rep and as a company, you want your employees to feel comfortable going to you and saying, "Hey, listen, um, you know, I love my job. I love what I do. I'm very good at it, and I want to keep on doing it. But I need to do it from a different space, or I need to do it during a different scheduling time frame, or I need to do it, more days, less hours." And employees, I think oftentimes we don't give them enough credit for their own ability to solve their own problems. And so I don't think this is a situation where HR offices need to get very stressed, feeling like now they've got to come up with 100 different variants of what's going to work for each different type of employee based on demographics or whatever it might be. That is not the solution. I don't think the onus is on the company to come up with the best environment in which the employee works. The onus on the company is to to be willing to listen to what the employee is saying they need, and creating a level of trust between management and employees where those discussions can happen, and where the employee knows that they're being held accountable. Even in this alternative workspace, they're being held accountable for their productivity, whatever that looks like. They know it, their boss knows it, but there's a level of trust there where the company is willing to allow whatever particular flexibility constraints are needed for that employee in that moment, to help get them through that time period. And by doing that, of course, we know that the company saves money because they don't have to retrain somebody else in that space. They maintain, if this, let's put the example where this is one of their top performing employees, they keep that high performing person onboarded.
So many organizations have rolled out flexibility policies and they're still losing talented women. Are you saying the disconnect is that flexibility isn't everything?
Um, so that is part of it. I think it's important to understand that what I mentioned earlier, that we live in in a society outside of our homes that was built for the ease of men. And so you might be an employer who has a plethora of flexible work options. And you consider your package of flexible options to be really, really optimal or useful for so many different types of employees. But sometimes that's even not enough, right? So sometimes what's happening today. So I'll frame this for us in a nerdy economist perspective. I'm a wannabe historian. So if we look back at time generationally, what's going on with women, you can look back to like the 30s, 40s, 50s, where oftentimes women would go to college really in search of a mate, right? Because they knew that somebody who had a man who had a college, this is, different sex couples, a man who had a college degree would most likely generate more earnings than somebody who didn't. And so for women going to college was to get educated, but it was also a mate searching activity. That's, no longer the case today. Obviously, it was no longer the case for my generation. Again, I'm Gen X. With my mom's generation, I don't, that's baby boom generation. That was probably a transitional. And so women today are going to college because they have aspirations for careers. And that aspiration for careers means that after they leave college, they're more likely to enter into a career than a job. That also means that they see partnering up in families as a disruption to that career path. It's one of the reasons why we have reduction in fertility, reduction in birth rates today. Uh, Women are getting coupled up and partnered and married later in life. So they're spending a lot of their 20s working in jobs, accumulating wealth. They have a lot more disposable income today. Again, if you read my book, it's one of the reasons why Taylor Swift has been so successful in her business is that she's part of the millennial generation, and the millennials grew up in their 20s working and having lots of disposable income to spend on things that give them joy. Taylor was really able to tap into that. So it's a different dynamic today than it was historically. But part of what's happening today is that we've basically been telling this story for girls that if they want to really reduce gender inequality, if they want to, really advance in their career, they either have to do it at the cost of having a family and having children, and or they have to do it um, while having family and children and being totally burnt out. And so you could be an employer who offers just so many flexible options and it's still not going to be enough because there's only 24 hours in a day. So there are also things that I think employers can do in terms of advocating for social policies and advocating for public policies that create better systems to help your employees really balance their work and their careers with growing a family. And so that's another area that I think employers could really, um, be helpful in this framework in terms of your employees is by focusing also on kind of macro level social policy changes.
So a lot of this falls onto the manager, and we've known that since the pandemic, is that the manager has had to figure out, how do I work with this new dynamic? Are there any specific practices that actually move the needle for managers that you could detail for us?
I mean, I can tell you what I do. And I'm less familiar with the kind of literature post-pandemic in this space, but I observe a lot of folks around me who are managers and have lots of angst around how their employees are working, whether or not they're able to measure employee productivity. Um, I have frequent and often conversations with my staff, even to the point of daily conversations. We are almost always 2D, meaning that it's almost always virtual. And I have my team, one of us lives in Colorado, one of us lives on a farm in Kansas, a couple of us live here I'm in the Kansas City area. But when I hire people based on the skill set they can bring to the work that I'm doing. And I don't really care about where they're located, and I don't care about whether they can physically be with me or not. And I've had zero problems with productivity of my staff. And actually, I've have people who have really unique talents that I wouldn't be able to pull into my work if I was just hiring locally with people who are physically around me. Um, we do certain things to kind of mitigate the fact that we're distanced. So we'll do regular, 3D in-person meetings, um, uh, once or twice a year, where we can all get together and get some quality in-person time. That costs more, but again, it's worth it in the long run because the amount of productivity I'm getting from my people who work with me now is much higher than I would get if I was just focused locally. So I think what I'm trying to argue here is that I think it's important to not be overly concerned about what your employees are doing when you're not observing, when you're not next to them or with them. I think it's more important to really focus on having intentional relationships with your employees, intentional relationships that are, honest and focused on, capturing and measuring the productivity of the work instead of the process of the work. Um, and I think employees are really appreciate and respect managers who, are able to do that well because at the end of the day, we're all adults and we all want to be treated like adults and um, you know, we know what motivates us. We know how we work best. And it's also the onus is also on the employee to be able to articulate that to their manager. But then the onus on the manager, on the HR side, or on the employer leadership side is to be open to listening to what your employee is telling you, and then work together to figure out strategies that are going to be, the best fit.
So you found that college educated mothers with remote options were actually the most likely to leave during the pandemic. What do you think was going on there? Was it kind of what you're saying, is that they needed something else besides remote, and managers weren't giving it to them? Why were they leaving in the droves that they were?
So my theory about this is, we live in a society today where in order for a family to really thrive and to be considered middle class, you actually need two incomes or at least two incomes. We really don't live in a society where one income is going to get your family into a middle class, comfortable situation. And so the people who left, the women who left their jobs during the pandemic, where it wasn't due to the business collapsed or whatever. So like there were lots of women working in restaurants, and then the restaurant industry temporarily, until they figured out how to safely get their food out to folks, there were a handful of businesses that closed, and those women, lost their job. But the women who, by choice, chose to leave their job, especially white collar women who were working from home and working remotely. The situation during the pandemic was that if you were a mother, you were working from home, working remotely, and you were also taking care of all of the needs of your children. And so you were dealing with virtual schooling, helping your children learn virtual schooling. My spouse and I were both working during the pandemic, but any needs that my children had, they were continuously coming to my office. They were not going to dad's office. So dad was able to work remotely without any disruption all day long during the pandemic. I, on the other hand, I would have a kid come in at 9 a.m. They were bored, 10 a.m. The homework was too hard. They couldn't concentrate. 12 noon, I had forgotten to make them lunch and they were hungry, right? So it was like this continual interruption and it was extremely exhausting. And so if you were a mother working in a white collar job during the pandemic remotely from home and you didn't have childcare, and you had the option to leave, meaning that you had a spouse or a partner or somebody else in the household who was making an income that was, at least in the short run, allowed your family to sustain itself, again, in the short run. And again, remember budgets, family budgets and expenses decreased during the pandemic because we all were trapped in our homes. Women left because it was exhausting. They were working 2+ jobs, and so that's a unique situation. That's a little bit different than a situation that we would maybe find ourselves in today where, kids would, be off at daycare or in school and moms would be able to have more congruent chunks of the day where they're able to work straight through.
I'm going to put forward sort of a follow-up question from the audience about the idea of how do managers figure out what works best for their employees? Yes, you listen to them, but are there any actual policies you put in place? In other words, do you put out a survey? Do you have to, tell everybody up front, come to me case by case? I mean, how do you make people know that you're willing to be flexible and work around what they want within the constraints of, running a business?
Right.
How do
Yeah.
you do that?
It's a challenge. I would say, one thing that I think is really important, that doesn't really require, going out and taking a survey of your employees or something else of that sort, but this is really a mindset shift in the sense that, so I tell the story of I lived through my 20s, 30s, and most of my 40s feeling enraged. I was a PhD economist and, even working in the federal government with my two kids, I was working around a bunch of men who, either didn't have children or had a spouse who was taking on a lot of the responsibilities for caregiving. And I'm a mom, and so a lot of the responsibility for caregiving came down to me. Um, and one of the challenges, again, is that the way that we see our businesses and the way that we frame what's going on in businesses and what's going on with employees has to do with assumptions that the business leaders are folks who aren't burdened by heavy care responsibilities in their home, and also that the employees don't have heavy care responsibilities. And that just comes from traditionally the way that society has evolved and developed, where, it used to be mostly men who would go out in the workforce. I think today, when we're thinking about what can we do to help our employees, we have to reset that framework in our head And so the framework in our head tends to be all about maximization in the short run. And so how do we make the highest profit in the short run while minimizing expenses? And that's a very privileged kind of space to be in. And it's often not a space that women have the luxury of being in because there's so much invisible labor that takes place not only in our homes but also in our workplace that are assigned to women. That just isn't valued by society and is assumed that it will be taken care of by women. I can't tell you the number of times that um, I've seen in my professional space where women and men all with PhDs are working on projects, and it's the women who are scheduling the meetings, and it's the women who are doing the administrative tasks, even though everybody, all else, equal, everybody is the same in terms of job level and skill set and whatever education. So I think that, if I was to run a business focused on really trying to tap into the potential of women, uh, my first thought would be to make sure that I'm not taking for granted some of those activities that disproportionately affect women. And rather, I would try to center my business around um, an inclusive environment that um, more is more adept at recognizing and valuing all of the invisible work that women do. And so what that means is, I uh, have this again, I'll go back to my own team, but we have this perception that we're all humans and we're all in this together as a community. And as humans go on through their life, they age, they get married, they have children. And there's always going to be a point at which somebody is moving through any one of those stages. And it's not going to happen at exactly the same time. And so building structures that account for some of the caregiving needs that our employees have, and don't stigmatize it. Don't devalue it. Don't dismiss it as, well, this person can't work now because they're going to be, this person is no longer a valuable employee for me because now they have to go down to part-time so they can take care of an elder parent, whatever it is. I think we need to give our employees more grace, and I think we need to give ourselves more grace as employers. And I'm not really sure how to say this in the framework of a business where, again, you're trying to maximize profits and minimize costs. But I don't think it's okay to minimize costs on the backs of employees. And I think a lot of what we do today in society is we minimize costs on the backs of employees, in the sense that we tend to not value them if they have to take maternity leave, or we tend to not value them. I mean, we might say we value them, right? HR departments would say they value them, but in terms of actually creating a society that has structures for employees to ebb and flow and come in and out as their personal lives evolve. As businesses, we have very little patience for that. And that's the thing that I think, uh, you know, it would behoove us to think about that differently because, again, I go back to the study where, men's patent productivity peaks in their late 20s, women's patent productivity peaks in their early 40s. So if you're an employer who, and you can even look at the academic institution, it's set up for the ease of the men that I just mentioned, in the sense that when you start a job in academia, you go through a whole tenure process. And basically, the men are more likely to get tenure because their productivity is peaking, in their late 20s. And the tenure process starts as soon as you start your job, and it's like a 6-year process. And academic institutions who say, oh, well, these women didn't get enough. This is just a very stark example, but this academic female didn't get enough patents by her late 20s by the time she was up for tenure, and so we're going to boot her out of the organization. We're going to let her go. They lose the future productivity that she would give them when she does peak in productivity in her 40s. And the man that they kept is never going to be as productive as he was at that point. So they're keeping a man who's really not who's not giving them, additional benefits of productivity. And they're getting rid of the woman who's going to, in the future, would continue to increase to give them productivity. And so that's what I mean by the reframe of thinking about how we value employees. We have to get more comfortable with allowing the process to be different because the process for women is different than it is for men.
Are there any interventions that you've seen really have made a great impact, but they're really small, so they have like this outsized impact for what they are? I give you an example. I remember speaking to someone about they had a baby, they came back to work, they were pumping, and they needed a room in which to do it, and it kept changing. And so not only did they not know where to go, but they didn't have enough time to be finding it every time. And so
Yeah.
the business put in place, okay, this is it. Nobody goes in there. This is what it's for. You sign up for it. It was as simple as that. And it made this person's day. I mean, she said, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. Are there any small sort of but outsized impact interventions that you have seen work?
Um, I mean, the most common one that, we hear about isn't employer based. So two thoughts come to mind. The first is Tammy Duckworth, who is on the Hill. She's a legislator, US legislator, I think from Michigan, but I'm not sure. Uh, if you've ever seen these breastfeeding booths in the airports, they're there because of her. She
Right.
wrote legislation because she had a child and she was continually flying back and forth from DC to her home. And she was continually having this issue of not being able to pump and needing to pump when she was in the airport. And so this is again an example. And, I'm not going to say Tammy Duckworth is an employee, but, she had a need in her workspace. And then, she went to action to fill that need. And so this is where I'm saying where I think employees lots of times, you don't have to come up with the solutions for them. They're very good and resilient at coming up with their own solutions. All you have to do is listen and be willing to allow for a change in perception or a change in constraints or flexibility. The policy that always comes to mind, and it's not an employer policy, but it could be, is this paternity leave, the extension of paternity leave, where you give like 1 or 2 months to the dad, and if the family doesn't take it, then you lose those months. But if the dad takes it, then the family gets those months. And that was started, I think in Sweden and also in Canada, as a way to destigmatize taking parental leave for men, because there's lots of stigma in the workplace about men taking on more onerous caregiving responsibilities that interfere with work. Um, and so, policies like that, um, I think have the potential to. I lost my train of thought with that. Sorry.
Well, there's small things like that can balance out the stigma, and then
Yeah.
people start to actually, take the paternity leave, and then there's more
Mhm.
help at home. Um, Misty, you had talked about you started talking about Gen Zs and how they like to come into the office. Um, some people like to come into the office, some people don't. Younger workers tend to learn a lot more when through osmosis if they're there and being
Yeah.
able to, see how it's done. How does that happen if the people that they were learning from aren't there? So when
Yeah.
you said, for instance, I have frequent conversations, is it something that you every single day set up some time to say, okay, and this is what we're going to talk about? How do you make sure that osmosis still happens if either you or your employee isn't there?
Yeah. So we have regularly scheduled meetings, at least two every week. And I do a lot of, I don't know if it's called scaffolding, but I do a lot of, so I'm not only there working with younger or newer employees and working on projects with them and enhancing their skill set in that way. But I'm also having them meet with other staff. And so um, I try to do training that's not just like with me, but that we're all learning from each other. And so everybody on my team has different levels of skill sets and is at a different space in their career. And we try to really harness that by through multiple interactions. And we either take team on projects or, we'll have somebody start with a particular project and then bring in other members of the team and have them like walk those team members through what was their thought process, what was their ideas, did they think about this, did they think about that, and we really try to do all of our work in teams, but we have different leads. And so, and that means that I have a graduate student who's leading one of our projects that we're all doing together. I've got our lead data scientist leading another project. But again, we're all meeting together on a regular basis and talking through what the issues are and bringing our different perspectives to the table, bringing our different understandings to the table. Um, so that's pretty, that's really how we make it work. And then they always know that I'm available and anytime they need something from me that they can reach out and that I'm always accessible. I'm always tapping in with them. Hey, how did this go for you today? Did you have a good work day? Uh, were you motivated? Like what did anything get in your way? What got in your way? Let's talk through that. And so, I think the key to being a really good manager is having a really strong set of communication tools in your pocket so that you really do feel like you're able to tap into what's going on with your employees and vice versa, that they really feel that you're accessible.
So your book is called Swiftynomics, and it's a lot about how Taylor Swift took control of basically her career. Are there points in there that you would, tell people to think about in terms of their own careers? What could they do? What kinds of
Yeah.
things could they do?
And actually, I think this is a good spin-off to this discussion about what can employers do to really, motivate and keep employees. One thing that women have been doing over the past 10 to 20 years, and I write about a lot of these examples in my book, is that women have kind of gotten a little bit fed up, like waiting within the traditional system, either to move up or for their talent to be recognized. When they've had these in and outs of the workplace, again, to balance family life, whatever it might be. And there's so many women today who have decided that the traditional system doesn't work for them. And so, and again, women have more discretionary funds and wealth than we've ever had in the past. And so women are just starting to create parallel systems that work for them. And so Taylor Swift is one of them. She doesn't work within the traditional music industry. She has created her own parallel version of the music industry that works for her, right? And so that means that she prioritizes different things. She does her marketing differently in a way that's authentic to her, et cetera, et cetera. You can look at women like Reese Witherspoon, who grew up in Hollywood and realized early on that Hollywood executives were not funding movies to be made that really had authentic women's voices in them. And so Reese went over and started her own production company, Hello Sunshine. So many of the strong female lead content that we see on Netflix and in other spaces in the movie theaters today, originated from that Hello Sunshine space. So, so I think, Taylor's just one example of how women today, fed up with the traditional systems that don't work for them, are just generating their own spaces. And so I think employers do run the risk of losing some of this talent and, having employees, if they can't accommodate their real lives, having those employees at some point in the future become competitors. Um, and so the three things that I'll just wrap up here saying, the three things that I think that are really important from Taylor that we can all learn from, and this is more of not necessarily from an employer perspective, although I think it very much translates, but I think about it as like a person or a human perspective. The three things that Taylor does really well is authenticity. So she's really authentic, both with what she wants. When she started at the age of 14, she wanted to write and sing songs about white teenage girls in country music. And country music executives said, we don't think that there's a consumer base there. And obviously they were wrong. But that's what she wanted to do. And she felt like there was a community there that needed to be heard that hadn't. So she really leaned into that. She does a lot of authentic interactions with her fans. The second piece is reinvention. Taylor jumps from era to era, reinventing herself. Reinvention is a human activity. We all do it. We all reinvent. It's how we live. I think if you don't reinvent yourself at any point, you run the risk of not being your best self or of even wasting away. So I think women need to get more comfortable just really leaning into those reinventions when life hits us with unexpected things. Everybody does, but especially women, because we feel lots of shame when we study a career and then decide to switch out of that and go into something else so we can balance work and family. And I think we need to stop feeling shame around that. The third thing and the final thing that Taylor does really well, I think we can learn from, is masterminding. So Taylor is really good about if there's a barrier in front of her, maybe she can't move that barrier in the short run, but she tries to figure out strategies for how she can get to wherever her goal is in the long run. She's one of her biggest masterminds was buying back her first 6 albums. I think there's a lot to be learned from that for employees, but also for employers, especially if you're thinking about what are barriers that your employees are experiencing today, and how can you help them get around those barriers so that they can be as successful as they can for your company.
So as we finish up, a couple takeaways. I'd love to hear what is the one thing you'd say to HR leaders as they leave this today, to think about right now. What is the most important point that you want them to take away?
Yeah, I think to not feel burdened by having to try to figure out all of the answers and all of the solutions, to be willing to just you know feel not in control for a little bit and see what happens in a space where you just allow more earnest conversations with employees and allow employees to figure out the solutions for themselves and then figure out how you can support that infrastructure.
Is there anywhere that you're seeing real progress, like in a certain industry, in a certain type of job? What gives you hope?
Yeah, we were talking about this before we kind of started, but I'm a glass half full type of gal. So I'm actually really hopeful about the generation of young women today. I think there's a lot of noise at the national level going on. There's a lot of male broism backlash and chest pounding, which is fine, but I think women, and this is the part in my book, there's a chapter on generations, and I talk a lot about this. Women don't go away. So you don't, even if there's setbacks, even if there's attacks on, reproductive rights, whatever it might be, women don't stop fighting for gender equality. They don't stop fighting for the rights of the next generation to be as free as anybody else. And that's what gives me hope. And I think there's a lot of shifting going on right now where women are really coming in to own their own power. That's in, Gen X, but also with millennials. And I think it's really fun to watch them not be bogged down by maybe some of the traditional, misogynistic behavior that my generation or my mom's generation would have been bogged down by. So that gives me a lot of hope. Sorry, I know.
That's great.
Something
So
going on.
thank you so much for sharing your work and your perspective with us this afternoon. We heard you'll be in Boston for an upcoming event. And are there any details you could share with the group in case they want to go hear you live?
Yes, I would love for everybody to come. I'm going to be talking specifically about my book, Swiftynomics, at Brookline Booksmith. That is on April 3rd, which I believe is a Friday, and it'll be at 7 p.m. And then we can all chat in 3D.
Well, thank you again. So all of us gathered here today endorse closing workplace gender and racial wage gaps. I mean, it's kind of what this organization's all about. It's what you all have been doing for a long, long time. And you're, as 100% talent compact signers, you all are, you're the heroes. And heroes of Greater Boston because you've committed to changing policies and practices that leave certain groups behind in regard to promotions and higher salaries. Your job's always been hard. Now it's even harder. We hope the discussion today with Dr. Hegeness left you with some ideas about what steps you can take to keep your workforce strong and competitive in light of the changing environment. We at the BWWC are here to support you. So please reach out if there's anything we can do to help. Finally, we will be opening the portal next week for applications for our 2026 Wage Equity Impact Awards. This is a very special program that allows our members to both be recognized for their wage equity efforts and learn from each other about what works and what doesn't to make workplaces fairer. It's always one of our most well-attended events, and our celebration of winners will be held at a breakfast meeting scheduled for Wednesday, June 10th. You'll receive more information, but we encourage all of you to please apply and share with the group what's working. We used to call these the Innovative Initiative Awards, and then we decided, you know what? They don't have to be that innovative. They just have to work. So we'd love to hear what practices you're seeing that are having some impact at your workplace. We hope to see you all there. In the meantime, have a wonderful spring. Thank you.